Unless you have a particular interest, you probably haven't heard of him. Besides that, he is the most world-renowned psychic. Most world-renowned because he was very business savvy, if you will, and I don't necessarily think that he saw this way in his time, but he hired a secretary to document every single thing he did when he would go in these trance-like states and be able to figure out what was wrong with you and what you needed. Not a simple, take 2 of these and call me in the morning, but very specific instructions. And it always seemed to work. He comes into our story with over in Sigma, so in what we consider the Pungo area today. So Blindstone and Burroughs, these were 2 friends, and weird things would happen when they were together. For example, when they were young kids and they were having a sleepover, their dad heard a whole lot of ruckus, and he came up and he looked in the room and he saw the covers and the pillows all strewn about on the bed, and he's like, what happened here? And they tell him this tale of all of the covers and the pillows being raised up into the air, brushed about, and only falling when he entered the room. And he looks at them and he's like, oh, well, you guys just disturbed the ghost of Old Crump, completely making it up. But it seems like Old Crump had some sticking power, because when he leaves the room, same thing happens, covers, pillows up in the air, and then a rocking chair came on the bed. And the weird thing happened when they tried to lift off the rocking chair, these 2 boys, is it got heavier and heavier and heavier, again until the dad enters the room, and then they're able to put it back in order. So they always kind of had one eye open whenever they were together. Things would happen into their adulthood. Chairs would get pulled out from under people and end up in piles together. Nobody's around. They could never be in the same car together. One of them, the car just would not start. So one of them always had to walk while the other one drove. This brought a lot of attention. And so Edgar Casey and some newspaper reporters all got together and they had a seance of sort. And there was one newspaper reporter that was like, I don't believe in ghosts. There's no way you can convince me. Like, these boys are doing it somehow. And so he was right up next to him the entire seance. It was the same thing. The chairs came together, pile of heap, and he was like, I didn't see his hands move. People started levitating. Again, didn't see the hands move. And he was a skeptic so much so that when he wrote in the paper the next day, he says, seeing may be believing most of the time. While I would be willing to take an affidavit that all I have written is true, but I don't believe it, simply because I don't believe in ghosts and such things. So even though he saw with his own eyes, he still says there's absolutely no way.
But no explanation.
But no explanation. Probably our most famous oddball here in Virginia Beach is the Witch of Pungo, Grace Sherwood. So I have a couple of pictures of her and that are related to her. So it's not uncommon that we think of people nowadays. We'd use like weird or off, and some of us embrace it, and some people still don't like to be called weird. Back in Grace's day, this was when the witch hysteria was. So if you did anything that was even slightly off from the normal, you were a witch. But unlike in Massachusetts, here in Virginia, you actually had the ability to defend yourself. So if I said you're a witch, that in Salem, your life would be over and you're done with. Here in Virginia, you can say, no, I'm not, let's go to court, and actually sue them back. So Grace attracted a lot of attention, and one of the reasons was that this time, she was an only child, and when her parents passed away, she got their farm, so she worked on the farm. And being a practical lady, she worked on the farm in men's clothes, because you don't want a big poofy dress when you're down working with your garden. You want those nice pants. However, at this time, the guys' clothes was more form-fitting than the women's clothes because they had those big poofy dresses. So you can imagine this attracted some attention. And this would ruffle the feathers of the wives, and so they would accuse her of being a witch. From things that she cast a spell on her cow and no longer produces milk, to she grew claws, jumped on my back, and rode me around the room like a horse. Well, eventually this happens so often, you might get a little fed up and say, I'm not going to court. This happened to Grace. The particular offense, she was making some scones and ran out of rosemary, and so she was accused of bewitching a young kid, then going into an eggshell and sailing across the ocean, getting some rosemary from England and coming back to finish off her scones.
I want to do that.
And she's like, this is absolutely ridiculous. I'm not going in for this. Well, you can imagine if you don't go in for your appearance, that there's some consequences, and so a warrant was issued for her arrest. They arrest her, they bring her in, and this warrant said that they would search her body and look for the devil's mark. Well, they found something on her. Something that we would attribute today to probably just being a mole that was raised off the skin a little bit. But at the time, they said that this is the devil's mark, and that's where he would suckle the teeth. And so she was found to be a witch. Well, they sent her up to the higher courts, and the higher courts looked at this and they said, this is too vague, I don't want to deal with it in your courts. But the judge who's down here obviously has to do something because there's this hysteria going on. So he talks with Grace, and they agree to a trial by ducking. Now, a trial by ducking is one of those lose-lose situations. Because what happens is your big thumb and your big toe are strapped together, you're bound tightly and thrown into the water. If the water accepts you, you are innocent, but you drown to the bottom. If the water does not accept you when you float, you are evil, a witch, and therefore must be killed. So, some reason Grace agrees to this. She gets tied all up, thrown in the water, and she floats. They pull her back on the boat, and they put a Bible, throw her back in, big heavy Bible. Floats again. This time she comes out of her bounds and she actually swims around. There's a story that says that she comes out of the water and she starts taunting people. She is on record of saying that at the end of the day, you will be ducked yourself. You will go through a ducking on your own. Because what happened is they had to actually postpone this ducking. So when the actual ducking occurred, as opposed to doing it kind of in secret or just so the little town know, the word had gotten out. So there was almost like a county fair atmosphere down at the river on that day. Beautiful day, much like this. At the end, when they're taking her off and putting her into her jail cell, storm clouds roll in and everybody gets drenched. So I guess they kind of did go through their own ducking. She'll spend most of her life in jail, just kind of twiddling her thumbs until the witch hysteria kind of passes, and then they go to let her out. Now there's a story here too. They say that when she went to let out, she looked at her keeper and said, oh, go get me 2 clean plates. Do you want to see something or 2 dirty plates if you want to see something that you've never seen before. So 2 dirty plates are brought to Grace. She looks at him. She takes the 2 plates, puts them in her hands, and she flies off to her house. The rest of her life is pretty uneventful. The townspeople were still a little scared of Grace. They tried not to bother her. But she will eventually die a nice, peaceful death with her sons in her house. Or, some say, that on the night of her death, the entire room's filled with this black sooty smoke that you couldn't see in front of you. And once the smoke cleared, all that was left was 2 cloven footprints on the ground. She was taken by the devil.
So there's a bit to the story that I accidentally cut off because I thought that our tour guide had finished. But what it was that after the Witch of Pungo, Grace was buried, after 7 days there was this huge flood and her casket rose to the surface. So what they did, they buried her again. 7 days later, the casket rose to the surface again. So what they did was they decided to attach this really heavy slab of stone or something and then buried her again. Her grave stayed down, her casket stayed down this time. However, there are reports of people saying that she manifested herself in the form of a black cat, and a black cat rose from the grave and stayed on the grave for a while, and people believe that the black cat was indeed the Witch of Pungo, come back to life. So what happened was, because of that, there was this mass killing of black cats in the area, and historical reports allude to this, that it is actually somewhat true, because during that time period, during that summer, during that year, there was this huge infestation of rats because there were no longer any cats to help get rid of them. So that's pretty interesting.